Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. With me in the studio, as always, is the man himself, Mr. Eric J. Morin. I need like a...
right. Oh, yeah, Reese, can we get like that clapping stuff? Like, we need like the button. Yeah, why don't we have that? Like, we've been doing this podcast for like 4 years, man. We need like a...
I went to The Price is Right probably 10, 15 years ago, and it blew my mind because I didn't realize they have like a designated person that has like a applause sign that's like standing there that's like, this is your time to clap. That's what we need in the background.
We just need like all like the entire tower team to come in and like applause when we like it. We need like the different buttons, like, right? We need the different sounds.
Yeah, we could set that up.
It'd be like Friends or whatever when Ross at the keyboard or whatever with all the sounds like we need. Like,
yes.
Boy, I mean that was terrific.
The xylophone or whatever it is.
We need all the different sounds, Reese. That's what we need to make this podcast like get to the next level, brother.
I like it. I like
the
it.
Collab.
So today, what we're going to talk about is associates. So we were, as we do, we don't really script anything. We always just kind of come in here and we say, all right, what do we want to talk about today? So, Mr. Morin, you said you want to talk about associates. So let's jump in. What do you have in mind?
My best thinking time's in the shower. I don't know if anyone else says that, even though that sounds like a weird statement. It's like, for whatever reason, I don't know if your brain's like, the steam is like lighting up your brain or what's happening. Maybe
you're away from all your electronics and stuff. I think that's what it is.
It's like your
time to decompress.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this morning on Scale Associates, and I was thinking about the training around associates and thinking about the lack of training for associates. And it really was in my mind. I was thinking, because I mean, to be completely transparent, I was thinking about Tower and thinking about putting something together for associates is what was percolating in my brain. And then I was thinking about that. So that's kind of what was in my brain this morning. I was like, it's interesting to me how little training there is around associates. So one of the things we have a lot at Tower, but one of the things we have is a leadership academy. And so next year what I'm doing is I'm limiting who can come into the leadership academy. It's got to be either an owner, an associate, someone at the top of the organization. And so it can't be anyone who's not at the very top. There's really specific reasons why that, because at the top of any organization, you have leadership and management. Both are really important. And you got to make sure, like, if you rated your leadership on a scale of 1 to 10, not just yourself, I mean, maybe you give yourself a pat on the back, but if you rate yourself on a 1 to 10, if you start thinking about that, like, where's your leadership at? And leadership has more to do, with resiliency. It has to do with ultimately the way we represent ourselves. It's dealing with conflict. It's dealing with preparing for difficult times. It's results. It's all the things that ultimately speaking. Now people think leadership, as I said it before on this podcast, is inspiration. It's a lot more than inspiration. I mean, how do you deal with challenges? How do you deal with an angry patient? How do you deal with an upset team member? How do you make sure you're getting results? I mean, we were now going into football season, and so results matter, right? We're going to see more and more how we blame coaches. Ultimately, leadership, if it's not there. We see Deion Sanders. Now, this podcast might not age itself well because I don't know what's going to happen this season, but, Deion Sanders comes in, changes the whole culture in Colorado, and beats TCU, upsets, a team, a very strong team, the first game. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to age well. We'll see. Maybe it's a prediction. Maybe they do something crazy this year. I don't know. But I would say that, leadership is all those things. It's getting results. It's dealing with challenges. It's inspiring people. It's dealing with conflict. It's all these things. So you need at the top of an organization, but you also need management as well, right? Processes, procedures, how we do things. And so these things are both important at the top. But it's almost like somehow, in some way, so associates come in who are already in leadership. Now they would, John Maxwell would call it positional leadership. They're not really technically oftentimes in a leadership position, but they are leaders inside the organization based on title alone. They are considered to be leaders. And so there's a challenge of people get frustrated because associates leave organizations. But I would also argue is associates are brought into organizations as workhorses and thought of as workhorses. And so it's like, come in, put them to work, maybe do some clinical training, even the clinical training that associates do. You know, how many doctors are like, well, I'm not paying for that. Well, I'm not doing that. Well, that's on their own dime. That's on their own time. And so even trying to get a doctor who's making you money clinically trained, sometimes people are against even training their doctors to see patients and want them to pay for the education that ultimately produces more money for the practice, which is really crazy to me. And so that's what was on my mind this morning, Matthew. It's like this idea of like training up these people who are leaders within our organization.
I think it's fundamentally rooted in the fact that doctors are fearful that the associate's going to leave. Like, I think that's, I think 9 out of the 10 conversations I have when people come in, they're like, yeah, I had an associate at one point, didn't really work out, tried it a couple of times, and now I'm kind of looking for a next one. Or I have some associates that ultimately want to, move on and start their own practice, or I'm not really sure what they want to do, but they're fearful to train them because they're afraid they're going to leave. And I think a lot of times, even with any team member, regardless of associate, when they come in, the doctor should know kind of what their end game looks like. So when an associate comes into the organization, when have you had a conversation? Like, when have you taken the family out and said, hey, what are you guys looking to get accomplished? Like, how can I help you be more successful in this role and stay with us for a long period of time? I think doctors, just because in the industry as a whole, the last, 2 decades, it's been this idea that associates are going to come in, either take over the business or just leave you out to dry in a couple of years when they want to start their own practice. So I think it's kind of rooted in, being fearful of what's next. I think in regards to the training aspect, we just had an operations mastermind with, we always say, send your team to us. We'll send them back to you clinically or trained up, ready to go, ready to run the operations of the organization. The number one thing, because we were talking about treatment planning and like presenting cases and how to do that and what's the process look like for that, what's the follow-up afterwards. And there were several people that raised their hand and were just like, how do I get the associates to do better on the treatment side? Like, how do I, can you guys train them? Because we can't do anything. The head owner doesn't want to hear it. I go to the associate and they're like, well, you're just a hygienist or you're just this. How can you help me? I think it's that lack of training that needs to happen specifically around everything: leadership, treatment planning, how to be better at the operations. I think trying to find the role for the associate and giving them the tools to be successful it's what's lacking in the industry right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a smart point to bring out, Matthew, which is it's a fear-based thing, right? And it is like, it's interesting because it's like, oh, I'm not going to put money into this person who might leave me because I had someone leave me before, so therefore I won't train them up. But because I won't train them up, that it leads to lower production. It means lower case acceptance. It means ultimately them kind of oftentimes getting, venting to the other team members. It leads to disruption. It leads to lack of direction. It leads to lack of clarity. It leads to, and on and on and on. And then because it kind of creates its own problem. Because then all of a sudden this person leaves because they have lack of training, lack of clinical training, lack of leadership training, lack of process. They don't have any direction, and they're like, well, I'm out of here. Like, this sucks. I don't want to be here. I don't even know what my future is inside this organization. So then they leave, and it's like we're creating the same problem we're trying to avoid. It's. Here's the thing. I think we. So I'm gonna get romantic here, not towards you, Matthew. I love you and all, but what I mean by that is it's like going into a relationship with a partner, and when you get into that relationship, never pouring into that person, never giving them attention, never giving them, buying them flowers, never doing any of those things because you think, well, why would I do all this? Because my last partner left me. Or whatever trauma you've got. Yeah. And so because of that, I don't want to give this person any attention because this person might end up leaving me. So then all of a sudden this partner that you've actually taken on in your life leaves you because they feel like that they haven't got any flowers, they haven't got any attention, they haven't got any love or intimacy or whatever. And then they leave you, and then you're like, see, I knew that they would leave. That's why I didn't want to do anything. It's like, they left because you didn't do anything. Yeah. It's like literally this whole thing that is actually you're creating the problem you're trying not to have. And so it's like you've got like, maybe we need to go to like owning doctor trauma. Like there should be like owner doctor associate trauma boot camp or something. Like, right?
Yeah.
There should be like
how to overcome your fear.
How to overcome trauma, associate trauma, right? Maybe that's what we won't call it associate boot camp or something. It'd be like associate trauma boot camp. Because
do you think it has anything to do with like, let's say the doctor pours into the associate and he spends, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of resources. Or she in the business. She spends all the resources to get this person clinically trained up from a leadership standpoint, from operations, from treatment planning, all of these things. Do you think it has something to do with like the owning doctor fearful that that person eventually is going to become more skilled than they are?
I think I would argue it's probably less of that. I really do. I mean, it's a good question to ask. I think it's actually less of that. I think you hit it on the head with the first one, which is I do think if you train somebody up too much, like let's just say you're training them on full arch. Yeah. And then it's one of those things where it's like, unless you're providing so many patients that this doctor doesn't have to think about marketing, and so that they're doing tons of full arch cases and making tons of money but they're not actually having to do anything to get those patients in the door, and they understand how difficult it is to prospect and get those patients. I could see, not wanting owning doctors struggling to train those people up because they're like, well, I think this person might leave me because they realize if they got 100% of the case, what that would look like versus what I'm paying them now. Even though that they don't realize that they also have to pay for their own overhead and taxes and everything else. But I do think that it goes down to philosophy, right? It goes down to story and the story you tell yourself about associates, because you and I see it. Like the doctor that comes and talks to us with the crappiest attitude towards associates is the one who can't keep associates, right? I mean, would you agree? I mean,
100%. I know immediately when I talk to someone and they're like, I'm having problems with associates. Well, have you ever worked with an associate? Yeah, I've worked with a few. They just didn't work out. They just weren't the right fit. Okay, so every associate that you brought in hasn't been the right fit.
They have bad attitudes. They don't want to produce. Kids these days, all this stuff. So it's like, wouldn't we argue that that's probably a mentality? It's a leadership problem inside the organization ultimately, and if you can't keep people, it's like, well, and listen, I mean, some associates are going to leave. Like you can't, they just will. I mean, I don't care who you are. I mean, how many associates does Heartland lose a month? I mean, it happens. I mean, it's just part of the game. But, if you, from a leadership standpoint, believe, my job is to make people who come into this organization better than they were before they came in, to train them up, to make them better doctors, to impact the industry, right? There's a whole story, because there's a different story that could be told, right? The story could be, my job is to, when people come in, and we see this in doctors, right, in doctor relationships. I mean, I don't know how many doctors I've worked with that say, I love to mentor young doctors. Like, I've heard that my entire career. Okay, well.
Yeah, I hear it all the time.
Right.
They want to get to that point where they want to be a mentor.
Mentor, right. Yeah, we see it, right? So if you looked at yourself like a mentor versus a business owner, and in this mindset of saying, like, look, my job is to mentor young doctors. We're going to bring them in our organization. We're going to mentor them up. And I would argue that if you believed in mentorship and mentoring people, they'd be more likely to stay inside the organization, because you would be looking at them and saying, this is my mentee. This is the person I'm going to ultimately make a better doctor. And whether they stay with me long term or not, I don't know. And if you looked at your 5 associates and said to your 5 associates, my job is to make you better doctors. I'm going to make you a better doctor. I'm going to make you a better leader. I'm going to make you a better father, a better mother. I'm going to my job is to make you a better person. People would be more inspired to stay within that organization because they're being led. Instead of saying, I'm fearful as hell, I don't want to be taken advantage of, I don't, I always love this one. Ask your buddy who can't keep an associate if you should pay for your associate CE. Good God. So don't ask that guy. So
you're putting a benefits package together for your organization.
That's right.
You got to imagine what every other practice is saying down the street. Oh yeah, you can come in. We'll give you patients. You work 3-4 days clinically. You'll make this much, and that's the pitch. Whereas if you're like, we're going to mentor you, we're going to spend hours, we're going to give you money for CE, like we're going to pay for all these clinical stuff. That is a better pitch to a potential product than just, you'll come in. You might have a say, you might not. You'll be able to pay off some of your loans, and that's it.
Well, that's right. I mean, so we look at, and here's the interesting part. How are we taught to take care of associates? We literally watched an industry with 2.5% growth rate in dental practices with literally almost no associate retention. And we literally followed that model of horrible training, horrible retention practices, horrible mentoring programs. And we literally said, that's what we should do. And so, when you're listening to this podcast, like, I want you to take this seriously. Like you got to look at it from a different mentality. You've got to go in and say, look, my job is to inspire these people. My job is to lead them. My job is to educate them. My job is to make them better individuals, better doctors. If not for yourself, impact the industry. Leave a better mark, on the industry. Because if you're 55, if you're 58, if you're 62 and you're mentoring a young doctor, your legacy is that doctor's career. And not even that doctor then is taught how to teach doctors, and then that person mentors another person. I'm telling you, the legacy lingers on. You could have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 generations of doctors that have been impacted from you just taking the time. And if you looked at it like that, and you said, I want to have a legacy, and my legacy is to mentor your doctors. Some will stay within my organization, some will leave. But ultimately speaking, I'm going to leave the industry better than I found it. I'm going to leave the doctors that come into my mentorship better than I found them. I want people, and by the way, young doctors who would come seek you out because they heard that you're an amazing mentor. And they would tell their friends, man, I worked under Dr. Smith, and Dr. Smith, she is such an amazing doctor. She taught me so much how to be a great clinician. You should go work under Dr. Smith for a few years before you try to get on your, because she is the best. And so what would happen is you'd have a line of associates trying to get in. Well, how do I find great associates? I don't know. Teach them. Like, you'd be surprised at how many other associates would tell other associates, man, this was the greatest practice I was ever involved in. It changed my life. It changed my career. It changed my leadership. And so when we talk about scalability, if you're getting yourself out of the chair more, well, then maybe you should spend more time in mentorship and leading. And so it's one of these things where it's like you're creating the problem by not mentoring, by not investing, by not pouring in. You've got to pour into these people. And then when they leave, you get kind of disappointed because they left, and you go, and then if you say, well, I bought them a CE course. They should have stayed with me for 35 years. It doesn't work that way. No. It's okay if they leave at some point. It sucks, but if you have a line of associates walking in the door, then bring them in and pour into them. And so I'm a big fan of clinical training for associates, teaching them full arch, teaching them procedures, teaching them how to get case acceptance. Case acceptance is an afterthought. I'm sorry, it just is. There's very little true training. It's funny because whether we want to admit it or not, it's a sales organization. Medical practices are a sales organization. And I would argue that you have to learn how to sell if you want to serve, and you got to learn how to close cases to help people. But yet there's very little amount, and then there's no leadership training. I mean, except at Tower Leadership, I don't know any other organization training people to be leaders. Yeah. And so there's no leadership training. There's very little clinical training. Don't tell me, well, they have to get their CE every year. That's not clinical training. That's not what I'm talking about. Yeah. So there's very little clinical training. There's no management training, and there's no direction for their career. And so I'm hoping you're hearing this podcast thinking to myself, oh my God, I've been seeing it all wrong, because you probably have.
Yeah, and I think when you look at one of the biggest examples is there's two sports figures out there that have like a tree, they call it. You got Bill Belichick, and then you have Nick Saban. So the best example of like Nick Saban is Kirby Smart worked on his staff for, 10, 15 years, and now he's won 2 national championships. That probably makes him happy. I imagine Nick Saban, most people probably think, ultimately the dogs are taking over all of this stuff. But I guarantee you, if you ask Nick Saban, he is happy for Kirby Smart's success, because he poured into them. He showed them how to run a successful organization. And Kirby, if you ask him, he's like, I could not have done this without the help of Nick Saban. So you want to be that figure. Like, you want to be the guy that wants, or the girl that everybody wants to come play for. Pat Summitt for Tennessee way back in the day. People wanted to go work for her. They wanted to work underneath her to learn everything that they could. And then if they wanted to step out and go be successful elsewhere, they knew they would be successful because of the leadership they had in place. So you need to look at your organization internally and say, do I have that environment? Like, do I have the environment that if someone comes in, regardless of who they are, I'm going to train them up to be as good as I am, if not better. If they stay with us, great. If they leave, they're only going to say good things about us in the marketplace. They're only going to go tell the residency, the school, and say, you need to start sending people over here. Give them 5, 6 to 10 years working underneath Dr. Smith. They're going to come out way better than they came in. So you need to look at your organization and say, do I have the culture for that? Is my team all rallied around that? Like, that's going to attract better people for your organization. It's going to help with recruitment. It's going to help with retention. Associates aren't going to want to leave either. It's going to have to be a perfect situation for them to leave. Like Kirby, it was a perfect situation. It was his alma mater. He went back to UGA, and that's what fit for him. For an associate, it might be they go back to their hometown, but at least they're going to be as successful as when they came into the organization.
But imagine if Nick Saban had said, I don't want to pour into any of my coaches because they might leave Alabama. And so I'm not going to hire any coaches. If I do, I'm not going to pour into them because heaven forbid. I mean, it's got to be hard as a it's a great analogy because for those of you who don't know, maybe don't follow football and have no clue what we're talking about, Alabama being, in the last 20 years, the largest owner of national championships, right? Probably the most dominating sports team of all sports in the last 20 years, and has built a culture of success. And he every year, people come and pick off his top coaches, and every year. And so he's constantly having to replace coaches. And then when a new coach comes in, he has to mentor the new coach, and then that person leaves. And it's constant. And instead of looking at the attitude of, hey, look, I don't want to pour into coaches because they might leave me, he is constantly pouring into coaches because that's how you win national titles. Now, in your case, your national title might be your revenue goals. Your national title might be patient satisfaction. Your national championship is better, and maybe that's a. We'll have to write that down for a future podcast. Like, what is your national championship, right? Because you're in a race for a national championship. You're in the race to be number one. So if the greatest sports team in the last 20 years has done it by literally done it by what we're telling you to do on this podcast, which is pour into people, create the national championship team. Don't be afraid that somebody leaves. Now all of a sudden your organization's decimated. Somebody's going to leave. But how do you create a cycle and a system? Now you might say, well, I don't have time for that. So hire the people who do, or outsource it or whatever. But how do you create a system? Like you should be, like people are lining up to go to next year's Leadership Academy, and I'm actually now single-handedly deciding who gets in and gets out. I've got the keys to the castle.
The keys.
Because I want the right people in the room. And so I think that when we look at our organizations, like, what is your national championship, and what do you have to do to get there? You have to pour into these associates, and knowing that they might leave, just keep pouring into them and keep building them and create a system. Like, every time I hire an associate, they go through this training and this training and this training and this training. And I spend this many hours with them, and then this person spends so many hours with them. Like, you have to create that program. And if you're someone who's not good at creating programs, fine, find someone on your team or outsource it, but create the program of growth and mentorship inside your organization. And even if you have to send them to 5 things a year, like, send them to 5 things a year. Do not let someone tell you should not invest in your associate. Whoever tells you that, you should just walk away. Kindly just say, hey, I really appreciate your advice, and just walk away, and then take whatever advice they gave you, and then find the closest garbage can and throw it in there, and then keep moving on because it's crappy advice. The truth is, you should invest in these people. You should have a program of investing. And if you're not willing to invest, all research shows that this is how you keep top talent. And so we have to pour into people, and we have to pour into our associates, and so pay them well, treat them well, mentor them well, lead them well, educate them well. I mean, this is how we create growth inside of a dental organization, is to truly pour into people. And we don't, if somebody leaves, we don't take it out on every associate from that point going forward. And I joke that it's trauma, but it actually is. And hear what I'm saying about that. It creates a lack of trust. But that is trauma. That is like your own personal trauma. That you, because one person left, now all people must suffer because you know, whether it's the 10-year-old version of you or whatever it is, felt hurt. And that person then decided to put up a wall and say, I'll never again be hurt by an associate. And I will never pour into somebody and take the chance of them leaving. And so you create a self-destructing organization instead of a self-growing organization or self-managing organization, because in a sense you have trauma around somebody leaving you. And you can take that for what it's worth. You can dismiss it or you can listen to me, because some people have personal trauma that actually goes with that too, and then they struggle with that. But it's holding your organization back. So maybe you need to go see a therapist. I mean, maybe
Therapy,
we should have like associate therapy. Like we should have look. This podcast is creating all kinds of courses. Just so you know, we got the associate trauma therapy boot camp.
I think it's generational. I think it's so rooted in dentistry right now, because you know it's been the same way for 100 years. Like, it's dentistry comes, there's someone that gets out of school, they go work for the doctor doesn't pay them any attention, then they end up leaving, and then it's a cycle. They come in with the notion that I'm going to be a doctor, and that's the associate's going to come in, they're going to work for a few years, and they're going to be gone. And then it's been the same way every single time. So you have the newer generation that is, you know, looking for something more in a practice. Like, a lot of them aren't wanting to own a dental practice. Like, they want to just be an associate. Well, how do we take care of them? How do we train them up so if they want to be an associate long term, that they want to be with us for long term, and if they open the practice, that they're successful. And it's breaking that wheel. Like, so if you're an associate right now listening to this podcast, you need to start looking at, all right, so what is the doctor doing for me? Like, are they helping me grow these things? If you have aspirations to owning your own practice, how can you put those into place? Like, start building. We're going to do a podcast on national championship. How do you build your national championship team now? And if you are a doctor, do I have the team to win a national championship? And then how do I put that in place? Because your associates are going to be potentially your quarterback, your offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, like the big time positions. How do we make sure we lean into that? How do we build that up so that our generations now and in the future are taken care of? And there's a new preconceived notion that, yeah, we're a mentorship business. We come in, we mentor people, we move on, and then we mentor the next group and the next group, and generational from there.
I hope you realize that this podcast is on scaling, and anyone listening, you know, we're ultimately telling you how to scale your organization, because, by the way, it's not just associates. I hope you know that. But this is how you scale. And so, you know, take this podcast where I'm looking at, Reese has got a little clock going. It's like 27 minutes and 19 seconds, 20 seconds, 21 seconds, 22. And so, you know, in 27 minutes, you know, we might have given you something that truly unlocks the potential of your practice. So what I would encourage you to do is take this podcast and create some action steps around it. So create some, don't listen to 27 minutes of a podcast and just be inspired or hear something. Go, like, create a plan around it. If you need help, reach out to us. We'll help you create a plan around it. But this is about creating a plan around associate retention. And it's not just about, well, I'll just give them some equity or whatever. People want to be inspired and led. And so you're right, Matthew. Some people just want to be associates for their career. But if they're going to be associates for their career, they're probably going to try to find the place that helps them be the best doctor, make the most money, be the best leader, be the best father or mother. And so if your organization doesn't do that, then they're going to look for the next place to go to actually get those skills. So, you know, I would argue you've got to create the organization that can do that. And so think about the programs you have right now. Think about what separates you in the marketplace. Think about your mentorship. Think about your clinical training, your sales training, your leadership training, your management training, direction, those types of things. And And you can write those down and rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, like 1 to 10. How well am I preparing my associates in leadership and training them in true leadership, not inspiration, leadership? What is it, leadership? Because you might not even know. And so 1 to 10. And how about management? How about direction? How about, case presentation, right? Case closing. How about clinical training, right? How about, dealing with conflict? How about, you can focus on results. How well do I train them to get the results? I mean, I can keep going on and on. Like start like 1 to 10. How am I doing? And if you start rating yourself, unless you're just trying to pat yourself on the back, you're probably looking at yourself and going, "Wow, I guess I'm not really training them up." And if you're not training them up, it's time to do so. So, I would take that out of this podcast. It's roughly a half an hour podcast. Take that, run with it. Make it. Make something special in the marketplace, make something different, and make this content come to life for your organization.
I like it. I think it's like a great 30-minute quick start to your guys' morning. As always, share, like, subscribe, share this with associates, share this with other doctors. I think everybody needs to hear, different messages in the marketplace. And we get, all the time people tell us, I'm so glad you guys talked about blank. I'm so glad that I reached out to this doctor and sent him your guys' information because of the podcast. We love those stories. I mean, ultimately, that's why Eric and I do these podcasts, is to help you guys out, get you in the right mindset so you guys can go tackle the week. We're getting close. It's September now, so we got 4 months to finish strong. So like, subscribe, share with others. Thank you as always for being in the studio with us, Mr. Morin, and we'll see you guys next time.